Dr. Paul, you've seen some pretty bad federal budgets over the years, and you've voted against every budget for over a decade. Is this one of the worst budgets you've seen, and do you see any room for improvement in the next few years?
It is one of the worst. But, you know, compared to what they put on the floor, what we're voting on today, compared to the current year, it's actually a little bit better, believe it or not. They're projecting a $1.5 trillion deficit, and they're claiming this is going down $400 billion. But I don't happen to believe this. This will turn out to be probably the worst year, because in a time of recession, the income is always less than they expect, and the expenditures are always much higher. So they're projecting now that we'll have $1.1 trillion. I'm predicting that we'll probably have $2 trillion deficit, and this $3.6 trillion budget, I predict that it's over $4 trillion, because they'll have supplementals. I've never been here where they haven't had a supplemental, and they don't have all the war money in this budget. And actually, where some people thought we might be able to cut back a little bit would be on the foreign policy and the war, since Obama had talked about bringing troops home. But he's actually putting a lot more troops in Afghanistan. The war is spreading into Pakistan. So those expenditures are going up. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of supplementals. And so I think this is going to be a very, very bad budget, and it's not going to help us get out of recession.
Since you mentioned the supplementals, do you see also potentially any supplemental economic bills, maybe another TARP program, another stimulus package? Do you foresee anything like that within the next year?
I wouldn't be surprised, because this economy is not going to bounce back, because we have been spending a lot of money, but when government spends the money, it's not necessarily a positive. It's actually a negative, because it's taken out of the economy and it's not spent wisely. So things will probably get worse, and since they don't know too much what to do around here other than more of the same, I mean, we got in this trouble by spending and borrowing and printing money, so they say, well, we're in trouble. Well, we're going to spend and borrow and print more money. So I would expect that they will do this, and I just think it's delaying the inevitable. It's going to delay the correction that we need. We really need to get things back to normal, rather than just assuming that if we spend more money, that this is going to solve the problem.
Switching gears a little bit, the G20 is currently meeting in London. What types of proposals do you think are going to come out of this latest meeting?
Probably nothing of real importance. There'll probably be a lot of talk and a lot of publicity about how they're going to work together. One proposal they'll probably suggest, they've been talking about, and that is to globalize all regulations. See, they're making the assumption, just as we do here in the Congress, that the problem is that there's too much freedom, there's too much capitalism, and therefore we have to regulate. And since the so-called regulations that we've had up until now haven't worked, they want to globalize it, which means more world government. They want to have more UN, more World Bank, more IMF, more WTO, and I think they're moving in that direction. Also, they probably won't have an announcement, but I am convinced they're talking about it behind the scenes but won't admit it, is they have to admit to themselves that this financial crisis has brought us to the point where we have to admit the dollar reserve standard, which we've been operating with since 1971, has failed. So that's why the financial system has collapsed. But we still have the dollar sitting out there, and they think, well, we'll just rebuild it. But they can't do that. They'd like to, or they'd like to introduce a new currency. Even in 1944, when the IMF was started, they talked about paper gold. These were the special drawing rights. They thought that if they could just create paper money out of thin air, that it would work as if it were gold. Well, that never got off the ground, but they keep thinking about that, and they're talking about that again. But on occasion, you have countries like Russia and maybe even China suggest, well, if you're going to do that, maybe the IMF should put gold in as a reserve against these special drawing rights. At the same time, the IMF is announcing they're going to sell gold to help the third world nations. You know, one of the things they're claiming they're trying to do with the group of 20 rather than the group of 7 is that they'll bring in the third world nations, the developing countries, so that they can get help from the richer countries. But what I see and what I get nervous about is that we all may end up like a developing country. You know, the 7 richer countries may be just gotten poorer rather than the rich countries bailing out the poorer countries. So there's a need for another reserve currency. That's the wonderful thing about a gold standard. It is global. There's nothing wrong with having a global monetary system because that would be very, very good. But if you didn't have fluctuating values, this would stabilize and enhance trade. This would be very beneficial. There's token talk about gold, but very little. I think they're talking behind the scenes much more than we hear about in having this international world currency. But if it's strictly fiat, strictly created out of thin air, it will not substitute. And like I said, I think the greatest danger of what will come out of the G20 meeting will be globalization of regulation, more global government, more world government, rather than dealing with national sovereignty, sound money, sound economics, balanced budgets, savings, and allowing the marketplace to work. We right now are in the process, nationally as well as internationally, blaming that freedom on all our problems, that we've had too much freedom. But this happened in the 30s. They blamed the gold standard and capitalism. So that introduced into the 30s the welfare state. But now we are going to the next stage, and it's much worse this time. And we hear so rarely that the cause has been that we had too much government, too much taxes, too much regulations, a fiat monetary system, and this is why I think we live in very dangerous times. And hopefully, our side can perk up and win this intellectual argument.
What do you think it would take to bring about a return to the international gold-based system? And do you think that something coming about in the present age would be more similar to the classical gold standard or the Bretton Woods kind of gold exchange standard?
I don't think we're on the verge of it, but if they decide they have to, if you have runaway inflation, then you're forced to do it. This is what's happened in the past. The only way you can get stability back is to quit printing money and stabilize the currency and quit the spending. I think if they did go back, they are not likely to accept the type of gold standard that the free market requests, and that is a gold coin standard where you have the actually gold in circulation, or you can get gold from the bank if you wanted to, which would restrict the government. That is what we would need and want. But the most I think we could hope for, and that is not on the horizon, not soon, would be some type of a gold exchange standard where they would use gold in the reserves. It would help, just as the dollar reserve standard of the Bretton Woods from 1944 to 71. We weren't allowed to own gold. It wasn't a gold standard, but there were restrictions on how fast they could print money. So it was after 1971, when there was no gold attachment, that everything skyrocketed. The growth of government, the spending went up, the deficits went up. But so right now, I would think that the most they would consider is some loose linkage. But that again would just set the stage for maybe a temporary reprieve.